Hi, Web Design 1 class. This is Mrs. Miskin. I'm going to go over the CSS effects and image editing lesson, and then go over the requirements for assignment number 8. So first of all, let's go over CSS effects. I'm going to share my screen and go over the PowerPoint with you. Okay, so first of all, what I mean by CSS effects. Using properties in CSS to make something, a text or image object, look like it has something extra applied to it. But we're using CSS instead of actually manipulating that image. This is especially helpful on images. So you don't have to edit the images in a photo editing program. If you look at this picture right here, the one on the left is just the regular picture as you would add with an image tag. On the right is the same image, but with some CSS applied to make it look like it has almost like that Polaroid border and then a shadow on it. Okay, so it looks a little bit different, just takes it one step up, but it's all CSS, so it can be changed and edited and modified and taken away if we wanted to. So let's look at some of the different properties that create effects using CSS. So first of all, border radius. Border radius is one that we used during the sushi restaurant practice page. And it has to be used with a background color also. Otherwise, you can't see that rounded effect. You could use it with a border property, and then that border line would be rounded in the corner. So either one of those. In this case, I'm using it with background color. And then I would probably have some padding also so that there's space around the content, the text, or an image. You could do it with either one. And then border radius is a pixel size. So this one, for example, is 10. You could go up or down depending on how much you want that rounded edge to be. This one's pretty slight, but you could go up for a much more rounded button or smaller, like say 5px. For it to just be a really, really slight difference. But you can see just looking at those examples on the bottom, on the left, it's square, very normal. But with one property of CSS, we can make them look like buttons, even though it's just text and color, okay? So that adds a really cool effect to our menus, for example. Okay, let's explore some other properties. Position. The position property is used to place an element in a specific position on the page or allow it to appear outside of the normal flow. The most common usage is when you have a header or a footer that remains at the top or the bottom of the page, even when scrolling. So this is really common. It's also called a sticky header, if you've ever heard of something like that. So what it does is it makes that header element stay at the top of the page, and then everything else flows underneath it. That way, your logo and your menu are always on the top. They don't disappear as you scroll. You do need to have two properties in order for this to work. First, position fixed. That means fix that element right where it is. Then, depending on what element it is and where you want it to appear, we need to give it another value for the side of the browser that it needs to be connected to. So if you look at the code here, for header, we're using position fixed and then top 0, meaning put it at the very top. And with the footer example below that, position fixed, bottom 0. You could also try this with left or right and just make that position 0, and then it would fix to the left or the right of the screen, just depending on what you wanted to do. Okay, you can experiment with heights, paddings, margins, and get the exact effect that you want. But that will allow you to place one element in one spot and it will stay there. Okay, let's look at some more. Opacity. Opacity refers to how transparent an object is. This is especially helpful when we are creating hover effects, either on images or on text. The default value is 1, meaning that it's completely opaque, not transparent at all. A value of 0.5 is 50% transparent. So if you look at these examples down below, the opacity 1, that's the full image. Then opacity 0.7 is about 30%. And then opacity 0.3 is about 70% opaque. I'm sorry, transparent. So you can see how that fades. If you were to hover over it and you had an opacity set on the hover, then it would look like it's either lightening or darkening or filling in or becoming colorized or something like that. Just something different that you can use to make a cool effect. You can also apply this to text. It doesn't always have to be images, but it's usually more dramatic on images. Okay, let's move on to box shadow. So box shadow can be applied to an image or another block element. And we have to have at least two different values, the offset, the horizontal offset and the vertical offset. So horizontal meaning left or right, vertical meaning top or bottom. And the first value, horizontal offset, will be, if you want it to be on the right side of the box, it needs to be a positive value. If you want it to be on the left side, you need it to be a negative value. And then the second value, so this is kind of like the shortcut codes that we use for margin or padding when we have two different values, but they're just separated by a space. And I'll show you an example in just a second. The bottom side is positive and the top side is a negative value. So think about your X and Y axis in this instance. You can also add values just separated by a space for blur. The more blurred the shadow will appear if you have a higher number. Spread, meaning how far away it is. And then color. So we can use either color names or hex names. The default color is black. But if you want something a little softer or a totally different color, you can change that. So I'm going to flip to an example. This is box shadow. So if you look at the top example, we've got the horizontal offset, the vertical offset, a blur number, and then a color. So over on the right, you can see that effect behind the image. Now I've got, on the bottom example, I've got reverse. I've got negative numbers, a much higher blur, and then I've changed the color to purple. So you can see the difference that those values make. You can apply that to either an image, because technically it is a box, even though it's an inline image. It does come in a box, it's a square. Or to any block element. You could put it on a header or maybe on main or something like that, just to set it apart. Okay, now just like box shadow, we can also apply the exact same thing to text shadow. So same rules as far as the offsets, vertical and horizontal. You can have a blur, a spread, or a color. And I'm just going to flip to the examples. You can go back to the screen if you need a little bit more example. A little more explanation. That text shadow and box shadow use the exact same properties, kind of like margin and padding are really, really similar, just different positions. These are just applied to either text or to something that's a box. So here are text shadow properties. Again, I'm using the same numbers on the top, a horizontal offset and vertical offset that are positive. So that's going to be bottom and right, then a blur and a different color. On the bottom example, it's going to be top and left and a bigger blur and a different color. So these are actually the same codes as the box shadow, but because this is applied to text, you can see it behind every letter. So just depending on what effect you want to have, you can change these numbers up and make it look really, really cool. Okay, so that is box shadow and text shadow. Okay, this is how I created that effect on the first slide. So I have an image. First of all, I'm applying padding to it so that you get that white base around it. And I'm giving it a background color of white to make sure that it's white. I've got a 1 pixel solid black border, so you get that line around the padding. And then I'm applying the box shadow so that you can see that shadow on the bottom and the right side of the image. Okay, so those are some different properties that you can use to really create some cool effects with your pages. Okay, just a reminder on our 3 S's, make sure you spell everything right, especially syntax with these. You want to make sure that you've got those spaces in between the values so that they work out properly. Okay, so part of your final project is that you need to have an effect. And it can be just a text shadow, it can be a box shadow, it can be a border radius, and you can use opacity, but I will be looking in your styling for one of those properties, or position fixed, one of those for a couple of extra points on your final project. So just remember that that is part of the final project. You need to have just that one little bit of extra. So just go through that, practice with those, and see what you like best and what would apply most in your final project. Now we're going to go over image editing. So for your final project, you will need to use an image editor to manipulate some of your images. You'll be collecting images on the internet, and you'll want to resize or crop them so that they fit your needs. We're going to use a program called GIMP. It is available for free, and that's installed on all of the school computers. Or sorry, in our lab here, it's installed on your computers here. So you'll be able to use those. I'm going to walk through just the basic image editing functions that a web designer would come across all the time. And these are things that I do all the time for my clients. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will go over image editing. Okay, and I'll also I'll walk you through this process, and you will have an assignment where you will need to demonstrate these properties. So let's talk about image editing. So the three most common: resizing images, cropping images, and then occasionally creating new images. So you'll have an opportunity to do all three of those tasks for your assignment. Some of you may be familiar with Adobe Photoshop, also Pixlr. There's lots of different programs out there. GIMP is just free and it's available, so we put that on the computers here, and then we just have that consistency. It's fairly similar to how Adobe Photoshop works. So at least as far as those tasks, but there are probably many, many others out there. So let's first of all talk about resizing images. Now, when we've added images before, and you've been able to see that when you just add it without changing the height or the width, and it can be really, really big depending on what you've downloaded. The actual file size of the image, however, does not change. And the dimensions of it, the dimensions of what is seen on the page does change when you edit height or width in CSS or in the HTML attributes. However, that file size doesn't. And so if you have a really, really big image that's maybe 4,000 pixels wide, it could be anywhere from 8 megabytes to 20 megabytes in size. And that full size image always has to download no matter what you see. You may change it so that the height is 300 instead of 4,000. It will still download a 4,000 pixel size picture, which could be 20 megabytes. Sometimes, depending on the speed, it could take anywhere from 20 seconds to a full minute to download. Most studies show that users will click away from a website, from a web page, if it's not completely loaded in 5 seconds or less. Okay, so we don't have 20 seconds to wait for one image to download. We need to reduce that file size and also reduce the physical size of that image. So let's look at some examples. Okay, the picture on the left is 4395 by 3426. It was 3.1 megabytes in size. And I edited it using the width attribute in CSS to make it 400 pixels wide. And if you look at this really closely, you can see that the one on the left is slightly more blurred than the other one. You don't see the fine detail. You can see most of it, but not quite as much. On the right, I've resized it using GIMP so that it's actually 400 pixels wide by 300 pixels tall. And it's now 77 kilobytes. So that's a huge difference between 3.1 megabytes and 77 kilobytes. It's a lot sharper. It's going to load so much faster. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and switch to the GIMP program. So we'll just go back and forth a little bit. And I'm going to open up GIMP. Now you'll see it If you go to the Windows icon on your computer in the bottom left corner, click that to go to the apps on the computer, and then find GIMP, and it'll just be in the G section. Okay, once it's loaded up, this is what you'll see. We have toolbars on the left. We've got some options across the top, and then some more options over on the right, depending on what tool we've selected. Now, for this exercise, I do need you to download a couple of images from Schoology. So let me show you where that is located. We're on week 9, 9-2. And hang on just one second. His switch, I'm just making sure. Okay. So on 9-2, there are 2 different images that you will need to download. Okay, there we go. All right. And remember, when you click on them, you need to then go to the download image and make sure you put them just in your web design folder so you can access it easier. I've already downloaded those and they're in my folder. So now I'm going to go to GIMP. Okay, and we're going to do a file and open. And we're going to take that first picture, the leaves. And I believe it's called Blur Bright Change. If you named it something different, that's fine. Just go ahead and open that up. And if you get this message to import the image from a color profile, you can go ahead and hit convert or keep. It'll do the same thing pretty much. Okay, so here is our main screen, our editing screen for GIMP. And down here in the bottom left corner, you'll see what percent, what size that image is. This is at 18.2%. And we can see it pretty clearly. That's about the size of the image that I want it to be at the end. But this is quite a bit, it's been resized. Sorry, not resized, but it's zoomed out so that you can see it, the whole thing in the screen. But really, if I go to 100%, it's huge. Okay, so you can see that really, really fine detail on the leaves. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the PowerPoint really quick so I make sure that I follow what you guys can see with the PowerPoint. So resizing images, we're going to go to File and Open, click that image. That's what we did already. So now we're going to go and change the dimensions of the image. So let's switch back to GIMP. Okay, and we're going to go up to the top here on the left to Image, and then Scale Image. If you're in Photoshop, and I believe it's Image Size that does the same thing, we want Scale Image in GIMP. See, there's that width again, 4395. And this right here is a lock that keeps the proportions. So if I change this one, I'm going to put 400 in here and then just click into height and it automatically changes it to 312 for me. That will keep the proportions. That's really important. When you've got those in there, go ahead and hit scale. Okay, now you can see that picture is right there. It's at 100%. Okay, that's exactly the size that I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the PowerPoint. Okay, and we just walk through those steps. Scale image, then 400 by 312. Okay, now rather than save this, we actually need to export this image. Most all of the image editing programs you'll come across, especially Photoshop or in this case, GIMP, when you're editing them, they create a different version of the image that is editable. So it's saved in a format, the extension, the dot whatever at the end. It's a format that only that program can recognize. The web is not going to recognize it. So we need to export this into an image format that the web will recognize so that we can use it. So we're going to go to File and Export. Then we'll rename the folder or the file, excuse me, and save it. So I will go back to GIMP. Okay, we're going to go up to File and see there's the Save and Save As. We don't want to copy over it. That's another thing. We do want to have the two different versions. What if I need a different size? What if I need it bigger? Or I do still need the original? We don't want to do that. So go to this option that says Export As. Okay, and then I'm going to keep it in the same folder, but what I would do is just add something to the file name that tells me which version of this image it is. So small, and I hit export. And I'll get another box that pops up. Depending on if it was a JPEG or a PNG, you'll get another option as far as quality or compression or something like that. I'm going to leave it at quality 90. That looks good. So I'm going to hit export again. Okay, and that's it. Now in my File Explorer, I'll have the two different versions of this picture. Right, I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint and let's walk through the next step. Okay, so we've renamed that file. We can go ahead and go on. Just a reminder on the three different types of image files. So JPEG, that was a JPEG that we were just using. That's suited for photographs. Excellent color support, does not support transparency or animation though. PNG, most commonly used as logos or icons. It has great color support and does support transparency. So commonly used for logos and icons, you'll see them all over the place. That way it doesn't have a background. You don't have that white box around it. It does not support animation. The GIF extension is the only one that does. However, you can only have up to 256 colors in a GIF file. So they're not really great for something that needs to be high quality. And just a reminder, down here in the right corner, you see an example of this that is not transparent. You see that white box around it. And then this that is transparent. So it looks like that image is the only thing on the background. Just makes it look a lot more professional. Okay. Some tips for saving: always rename the image. Don't overwrite it. That way you always have the original and you don't have to download it again or try and find it. You've always got it. Make sure that the extension is correct. So if you want it to be transparent, make sure it's a PNG or a GIF. You can change the quality if you need to. You don't want to mess with it too much. You don't want to go super, super low because it does take away some of the quality, even though it makes the file size really, really small. You want to leave it as high quality as you can with as low the file size as you can get. So just work that a little bit. If you need to go down in quality, just know that it might look bad. So you don't want to mess with it too much. Okay, so same thing with JPG or a PNG. You may just need to change the quality size or something like that. When you're doing an export to a PNG, you don't have to change any of those settings, just hit export. Okay, cropping images. This happens a lot when you get images that maybe have been scanned or they're just photos from someone's camera and there's extra stuff in the picture that you don't need. Maybe it's a product picture and you can see the background or a person's hand or something like that. This is used a lot to crop out the things that you don't need. Okay, so we're going to crop in GIMP. So again, we're going to open up a file and we'll go ahead and navigate to that. I have already downloaded them. They are on Schoology, both of these images. So I'm just going to go back to Schoology just to show you. So on week 9, 9-2, here's that second image. And you'll want to just download it to your web design folder. Okay, so I'm going to go back to GIMP and open that up now. Okay, so I'm going to go to File and Open. Okay, and you see this image right here. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, and we have that image open now. Okay, crop tool is on the left in the toolbox, and it looks like two right angles over the top of each other, almost like you're holding your hands in L shapes. Okay, so look for that little icon. That's the crop tool. When you find it, you're going to click down and drag across the picture to highlight what you want to keep. So let's go back to GIMP and we'll do that step. So in our toolbar, here is that crop tool. So I'm going to click on it. Notice when I hover over the picture, it turns into a cross with a little slice. Looks like a knife underneath it. So I'm going to click down, turns into a box. And I'm just going to drag a square around that image. You see that square in the corner, that now lit up. Everything that you don't want will be grayed out. And you'll see what you do want in here. If you just click one time, it will crop away the excess. Okay. Let's go back to the PowerPoint now. Okay, so there we did that step. Okay, we clicked inside, and then what we were left with is what we want. So we're going to go ahead and export that. Again, so that we can save it with a different name so that we don't overwrite the original. So we're going to do that step now. Let's go back to GIMP. Okay, so I'm going to go up to File and Export As. And again, I'm just going to change that name. I'm going to put cropped on it this time so that I know that that's the one that I cropped, so it's different. And then export. Remember, I get that extra. I could go down in quality if I wanted to, just a little bit, or you can leave it, either one. And then export. Now I have 2 copies of that image. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, we renamed it, saved it. Okay, the last step is to create something new. And sometimes you do this. Maybe your client wants you to put together a really simple logo for them, or you need to create something that's totally custom, or that maybe combines a couple of different things, an image and some text or something like that, so we can create a new image. So we're going to go to File and New, and then it'll give us a box that asks for dimensions. So let's go back to GIMP. And we'll do File and New. And here's that box. Let's just make this one 300 by 300. And you can really choose any size that you want. Okay, not super big. Again, it's at 100%. So I can make that bigger or smaller if I wanted to. Now, this portion is kind of just up to you. There are different tools, erasers, paint brushes that allow you to draw. You can have text. So that A will allow you to write text on your image. Okay, lots of different tools. Here's a smudge tool, warp, bucket fill. There's lots of different options. You can also use some of the filters or the tools up here. Just experiment, play around with this, and create something totally new. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, we walked through this step. Here are some different options for you. If you're creating the logo, there are some different sizes that are pretty common for logo sizes that keep the proportions a little bit better. You can also use some different tutorials or online user manuals for GIMP specifically. If you wanted to combine multiple photos into a new image, here at the bottom of this slide, you can see create a new image with the height and width, then add each picture as a new layer. So after you do file and new, and you make those dimensions, you do file and open as layers, open up that other one, and it layers those on top of the canvas that you just created. Again, you can experiment with this. You can get really, really fancy if you're really comfortable with this, or keep it really simple. Okay, when you are done, let's go back to GIMP. Now, remember I said that there's two different ways that GIMP saves. One is an editable file in GIMP, and the other is the exported file that's accessible on the web. So in this case, when we're creating, I want you to actually save it as both. So we'd go to File and Save. And notice here in the top, it says untitled.xcf. That is the GIMP file extension. So it recognizes all of the different tools like the text and things like that. So you can come back to it and edit it later. So I would just give it a name here and then hit save. I'm going to hit cancel right now. I don't need to save this one. But when I have it done and perfect, I can go to File and Export. And then I could export it as a JPG right here. Or if I come down here to select file type, I can open that up and choose a different file extension. Maybe if I wanted it to be a GIF or a PNG, I can choose those here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cancel on that. And let me just go ahead and stop sharing here. That's the end of our PowerPoint. So let's talk about the assignment. Let's go back to Schoology. Okay, what your assignment is for you to go and find a new image that you can resize, find another new image that you can crop, and then create one custom image. So you're going to do those same steps again. You're going to open up an image and resize it using the scale image function in GIMP. You're going to find another image, open it up and crop it. And then on both of those, you'll do an export and then rename it so that one of them says resized or small or large or something like that, and cropped. Then you're going to do file and new and create something totally new. Make sure you export it. And then I want 5 images total. So I want the original image, then the one you resized, not the ones, please don't send me the ones that we just went over. I don't want the leaf or the rocks. I want something totally new, okay? So one image, and then the one that you've resized. So that's why you really need to make sure that you give it a different name when you save it, so that it can be, so you can have 2 different files. Then you're going to find another one that needs something cropped out of it. And you'll crop it and then export that one. Send me both of those. And then you're going to create a new image in GIMP. Now, I don't need to see like a masterpiece. I just want to see that you've used a few of the tools in GIMP. You're a little familiar with it and you just played around and had fun. Okay, so when you go to Schoology, I'm expecting 5 images, the originals and the resized and crop ones, and then your new custom one. Okay, so 5 images, and those are due on Wednesday. So you have Tuesday and Wednesday to do these lessons. Okay, and those are CSS effects and image editing.